Good evening, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to TNT. Welcome to our series of overlooked women in the Bible. I am Pastor Des. It is great to be with you today. Again, if this is your first time joining us, welcome. Please drop in the chat to let us know where you are tuning in from. We have people all over the place who are tuning in. So it's so great to be here with you. Hi, Ronnie in Harlem, same as me. Wanda, Harlem. Greetings from the Bronx, Sharon. Good evening, Lily. It is great to see all of you here for our third week. Again, if you are joining us for the first time, welcome. Good evening, Renee Benson, aka my mama. Good evening, James. Good evening, Gail. Good to see you all here. Hi, Kashonda. Hi Ronnie. It's so good to see each and every one of you. I hope that you have been enjoying the series thus far. I have been enjoying facilitating it, and I have enjoyed all of the different things, the comments and stuff that you guys have been bringing. So again, as always, just in case, we never want to assume that everyone here has been here before, that this is kind of an open forum. While I'll be sharing some things, feel free to drop what you need to say in the chat. It could be a question, a comment, concern. I don't agree, whatever it is, just respecting the fact that, again, we all come from different backgrounds and different journeys. So we want to respect the process and respect where people are coming from. And that's not always the same place. But as we say in our identity statement, we are ever evolving. And that's really the point of Tuesday, noonday, or night when we used to do both transformation. It is to help you evolve in your process and your growing with God. And so that may not look the same for everybody, but as long as you're doing the work, that is all that matters. So happy to see each and every one of you today. Let us go ahead and pray, and then we will get started. God, we thank you. We thank you for this day. We thank you for these individuals. We thank you for this opportunity and this platform to just talk, to discuss, to learn, to grow, to transform, to evolve, God. We know that you are in the midst of our spaces, God. Whatever may have happened prior to this moment, let us leave it in that moment. Let us be in this moment, fully present, fully aware, fully here, so that we can get whatever you may want to be imparting on us today, God. Whether that comes from me or that comes from somebody on the chat, God, give us this day our daily bread. Let what is necessary hit on good soil and good ground so that it may be edified, so that we may grow and that we may transform. We love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. Amen. So, again, we're in our third week of Overlooked Women in the Bible. Each week, we're looking at women, or a woman or group of women in the Old Testament, and kind of ones you may not know about. And we're just kind of, bolstering out their stories and talking about what kind of lessons and things that we can grab from them in our everyday life. So the first week, we talked about the daughters of Zelophehad in Numbers. Last week, we did a little bit of a troubling text with Jael in the book of Judges. And today we are going to look at a woman named Abigail, who comes from us in the book of First Samuel. So the text for today is really, really long. I'm still scrolling. It's like 44 verses, and I don't want to read all of those at the same time and bore you all. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take that section, the section in chunks, and kind of give out the lessons that way, and kind of discuss the different portions of scripture that way, so that we're just reading a little bit, we're talking about it, and then we're moving on, and then we'll kind of wrap it up towards the end. So that I think that's the easiest way, because who wants to read 40 something verses, and who wants to, we don't want to do that. So again, we are in the book of Samuel, First Samuel, chapter 25. And we're going to start right at verse 1, just to give you a little bit of context. Though we are going to be talking about Abigail, a lot of the story in the beginning centers around David, who we know, and Nabal, who is actually Abigail's husband. And so context prior to First Samuel chapter 25 is that this is David before he has become king. So David is not yet King David. He's not a shepherd anymore, but he's not a king. He's in that that intermediate kind of space. And this is at the point where Saul wants to kill David. And so David goes on the run, and he's out hiding. He's taking all these men along with him to be in hiding. So that's the context of where our story is at this point. David's not king yet. He's on the run from Saul. Samuel has just died, and that is where we kind of hit smack dab in our text for today. So again, we are in 1 Samuel chapter 25. I'm reading it from the NRSV, but you can read it from whatever version you prefer. Sometimes the other versions are a little bit better. So we're going to start and then we'll stop, and I'll give the little things on the way. I will admit that even though this lesson's about what we can learn from people in the Bible and women in the Bible, sometimes it's not about learning what to do. It's also about being able to learn what not to do. And even though Abigail is uplifted for all of the things that she does, some of what she does for me personally was a little bit problematic, and I will explain those things. And it doesn't mean what she did was wrong, but sometimes we have to be able to admit, I don't know how I feel about this. And just because it's in the Bible does not mean that we have to be comfortable with it. Doesn't mean that we have to agree with it. Sometimes we are still working out things through our own personal experiences and our own personal lens, and knowing that God is big enough to handle that. You should know that God is big enough to handle that, because that's the only way you get to grow. So me and Abigail, we've been wrestling a little bit, and maybe you won't wrestle with her as much. So 1 Samuel chapter 25, we're starting in verse 1. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. They buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David got up and went down to the wilderness of Paran. There was a man in Moan whose property was in Carmel. The man was very rich. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. He was shearing his sheep in Carmel. Now the name of the man was Nabal, and the name of his wife Abigail. The woman was clever and beautiful, but the man was surly and mean. He was a Calebite. David heard in the wilderness that Nabal was shearing his sheep. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel and go to Nabal and greet him in my name. Thus you shall salute him. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. I hear that you have shearers. Now your shepherds have been with us, and we did them no harm, and they missed nothing all the time they were in Carmel. Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your sight, for we have come on a feast day. Please give whatever you have at your hand to your servants and to your son David." So here's what we need to understand just about the context of this. The chapter is set at a time where there's what we know as a sheep shearing festival, that is like a tongue twister. So this was a time when, it was a festival around shearing sheep. And even though David was on the run, he and these 400 kind of bandits were kind of this motley crew that were protecting the land. So they were keeping people from stealing the sheep and stealing the sheep of the people who were in this town. So basically what David is kind of saying is, hey, we've been protecting your people and your sheep. We talked about last week hospitality being this big thing. So David is essentially saying, hey, it's on a feast day. We're tired. We want you to impart hospitality, as is the law. We have protected you. You have lost nothing. Nabal is clearly rich. And so we've been protecting you. So please give us food. Remember, David's on the run. And so that is where we are. And that is what David is requesting. So then we're going to read on, because again, we haven't hit Abigail yet. All we know about Abigail is that she's married to this man named Nabal. We know that Nabal is mean. It says surly and mean. And Abigail is beautiful and clever, or intelligent and clever. She's actually the only woman in the Bible, who in the Hebrew Bible, that is mentioned to be both intelligent and pretty, which is an interesting thing because I'm sure there were plenty of women who were both intelligent and beautiful, but she is the only one in the Hebrew Bible who is mentioned in this way. And in verse 9, it says, we're going to read the next set of texts, and then we'll start getting into the good stuff. When David's young men came, they said all this to Nabal in the name of David, and then they waited. So they were coming in peace. They were coming kindly, and they were asking for hospitality. But Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is David? Who is this son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are breaking away from their masters. Shall I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have butchered from my shears and give it to men who have come from I do not know where?" So David's young men turned away and came back and told him all of this. David said to his men, "Every man strap on his sword," and every one of them strapped on his sword. David also strapped on his sword, and about 400 men went up after David, while 200 remained with the baggage. So understand, David has 600 men with him, and he's about to go let loose on Nabal and his whole house because this man has disrespected him. Now, remember, David might have not been a king, but at this point, folk know who David is. He has killed Goliath. There were that's why Saul was mad. Saul has killed his thousands. David has killed his tens of thousands. David was known in the land. So, Nabal's, kind of being a little bit rude and living into his name. His name means fool, and he was acting like one. My mama would get me. We were not allowed to say fool growing up. She'd say, "That's the worst thing you could call someone. You don't call anybody a fool," because in the Bible, it says you're not supposed to call anybody a fool. But his name literally means fool, and he was acting like one. Okay, so that's the context. David is mad. He's taking 400 men to roll up on Nabal's home. Okay, and now we hit verses 14 through 17. But one of the young men told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messengers out of the wilderness to salute our master, and he shouted insults at them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we suffered no harm, and we never missed anything when we were in the fields, as long as we were with them. They were a wall to us both night and day, all the while we were with them keeping the sheep. Now, therefore, know this and consider what you should do, for evil has been decided against our master and against all his house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him." So one of the young men is like, "Abigail, get your boy, because we're all about to die, right? These men protected us, and now they're about to roll up on us because your husband does not know how to act. He does not know how to speak to people, and he is ill-natured." And so they entreat Abigail, hoping that Abigail can kind of step in and do something to save them, because any other way, they're all going to die. And let's keep reading. We'll just keep reading this, and then we'll go to the lessons. So verses 18 through 22, then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves, 2 skins of wine, 5 sheep ready dressed, 5 measures of parched grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs. She loaded them on donkeys and said to her men, "Go on ahead of me. I am coming after you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she rode on the donkey and came down under cover of the mountain, and David and his men came down toward her, and she met them. Now David had said this, "Surely it was in vain that I protected all that this fellow has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed of all that belonged to him. But he has returned me evil for good. God do so to David, and more also, if by morning I leave so much as one male of all who belong to him." And that's the nice version, because if you read it in some other versions, David basically says, "May God do thus and more if by morning I leave a single pisser against the wall." He's like, "I'm going to kill all the men because this man disrespected me." So all of these people were going to suffer at the hands of one individual's behavior. And that's just something else to consider. How many of us have suffered because one person made a decision or choice, and an unwise one, that affected the whole lot of everybody? And that is what is about to happen to Nabal and all the men that are connected with him. And we're going to read this last little chunk, and then we'll stop here. Verses 23 through 25. When Abigail saw David, she hurried and alighted from the donkey and fell before David on her face, bowing to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt. Please let your servant speak in your ears and hear the words of your servant. My Lord, do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow, Nabal. For as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your servant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." Okay. So let's stop and talk a little bit about this, and then we will continue on with the text. And then here you will see my first kind of contention that I had a little bit with Abigail. But one of the lessons that we need to learn overall is be careful of the fools in your life. I don't know how else to say that, but you got to be careful. We have to be careful about who we associate with ourselves with and who we are connected to, because sometimes we will suffer the consequences of someone else's unwise decisions and choices. And as we talked about last week, sometimes we abdicate power and things to people because of their titles, boss, spouse, parent, whatever the thing may be. And we are in the company of fools who will constantly cause us to be in situations that are harmful. They may not be physically harmful, but they can be emotionally harmful. They can be spiritually harmful. They can be mentally harmful. And so in this way, Abigail, who is married to Nabal, she is in the company of a fool daily, that fool being her husband, who I imagine this is not the first time she has had to go and entreat or go and massage or go and fix a situation that he has kind of mucked up, right? And the reality is that when we have those types of individuals in our lives, sometimes we find that we are emotionally drained. We are tired because we are spending so much time cleaning up other people's messes that aren't even our fault. And so I don't know if anybody can relate to doing that, where you're always running around trying to fix, do, and you're trying to clean things up, and people begin to, yes, financially harmful too, right? And then people begin to come on you and rely on you to do those things. So you see how Nabal gets to just be Nabal. It's like, oh, even she is dismissing his behavior. He doesn't know any better. He is ill-natured. He's living into his name. That's a grown man. That's a grown man. But here she's like almost treating him like a child. He doesn't know any better. He doesn't know to do any better. That's just him living in his name. And not only that, she takes the responsibility when she wasn't even present and she didn't even know. And you see that in verse 24. "Upon me alone, my Lord, be the guilt." Now, it worked out in the favor of this as we read on this time, but sometimes you take on the responsibility, you take on the result of someone else's doing, and it doesn't always work out favorably. She did nothing, and yet she is allowing herself to take the full weight, while Nabal, at least at this present moment, has to take no responsibility for his actions. And how many of us in our lives allow other people to not take responsibility for their actions because we constantly jump in trying to save them. So yes, I'm not saying that what she did was wrong. Again, she's trying to she's not thinking about Nabal. She's probably thinking about all the people in her home. Again, they are very wealthy. So they have a lot of servants, a lot of people around them. And so I'm not knocking the hustle. I'm not knocking what she's doing, but I'm just saying, as we're learning and thinking about the lessons in our own life, that when we do that and when we choose to do that and who we do that for matters. We cannot jump into every situation saving people, because when we do that, we do not allow them to become responsible for what they're doing, to be emotionally mature or what is needed. And so sometimes we have to check our own selves, because we can find ourselves always constantly being in those situations. So that was where me and Abigail had a little bit of a thing, because I'm like, you took all the weight and all the guilt and all the responsibility. And as a person who personally sometimes does that, over responsible. It was a little bit like, oh, okay, it was reading me just a little bit. So we have to be careful who we are connected to and why we're connected to them. So I want to speak to that. And then I want to also speak to the fact that understanding that your decisions that honor God sometimes dishonor those things around you and the people around you. And we'll continue to read, but I say that because in theory, how the structure is set up right during that time, Nabal had made a declaration. He had declared that they were not going to help David and the men. So that would have basically been the word, because he is the man of the house. He is the head of the house. And so her going and choosing to do something different looks like she is not submitting not submitting to her husband, or not respecting, or not doing that. But in this other way, she is honoring. But sometimes there comes a point where there are things that God may impart on you, choices and decisions that you may make that feel like they are dishonoring to other people, but they're honoring you, right? Or they're honoring God. I know there have been times in my life where there have been things that I know that God set in my spirit that I was supposed to do, and folk around you do not agree with it, or will tell you that you should be doing the opposite thing. And in those moments, it's, do you listen to what you know, the spirit on the inside of you, or do you dishonor the spirit within inside of you, the Holy Spirit that God has given into you to listen to somebody else? Or do you take that risk, right? So that is where Abigail is. It's, do I stay here and do this? And sure, I guess she'll be up at heaven and everybody will be dead. And she'll be like, yeah, but I honored you, right? Or does she take the risk to do something that she feels is necessary? Okay, so let's continue reading on. We are on verses 26 to 31. Now then, my Lord, this is still Abigail speaking, as the Lord lives, and as you yourself live, since the Lord has restrained you from blood guilt and from taking vengeance with your own hand, now let your enemies and those who seek to do evil to my Lord be like Nabal. And now let this present that your servant has brought to you, my Lord, be given to the young men who follow my Lord. Please forgive the trespass of your servant. For the Lord will certainly make my Lord a sure house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil shall not be found in you so long as you live. If anyone should rise up to pursue you and to seek your life, the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living under the care of the Lord your God. But the lives of your enemies he shall sling out as from the hollow of a sling. When the Lord has done to my Lord according to all the good that he has spoken concerning you, and has appointed you prince over Israel, my Lord shall my Lord shall have no cause of grief or pangs of conscience for having shed blood without cause, or for having saved himself. And when the Lord has dealt with my Lord, then remember your servant. All she's essentially doing is saying, please don't kill these people. Please don't kill any of us. Don't abdicate what God has called you to, the things that you're supposed to do. She begins to speak into who David is, who God has called him to be, and says, don't let this situation sully that reputation. And when God blesses you, and when God comes and raises up your house, please make sure that you remember me when that happens. So again, here we see the same type of thing where, she has to come in a particular type of posture in order for David to hear her. Really, for any, Nabal came, brandish and loud, and he's almost able to do that because he is a man. But if she is going to get the ear of David, like we've seen with the other women, she has to be able to come in a different type of way. And we already know what that's like, because if you are a woman who can assert yourself, if you speak a certain way, especially if you're a woman of color, even more so, then you know that gets labeled a particular type of way that is not always the same if a man would have done it. And so sometimes we find ourselves having to kind of massage situations and how we're talking and dealing just so that we can be heard. It says that the squeaky wheel, the squeaky wheel gets the oil, but in our situations, not always the case, right? And so this is what's happening. She's coming, she's using 500 lords to make sure she understands and is clear about about her understanding who he is. But this is also her ability to speak something into David, right? She's actually, like you said, she's ministering to him, because again, sometimes you can speak a thing and not fully be aware of what someone's situation is. So she's not only begging for them to save her household, but she is also speaking all these things into David. And imagine how that feels when David is on the run. There was quite a many years between the time that he is told that he's going to be king and the time he actually becomes king. And in that time, he's, folks trying to kill him, question who he is. You're just Jesse's son. It wasn't this smooth kind of sail. And so imagine how those words of encouragement to David in the midst of him literally being on the run, what that did for him. And that is what our words are able to do at times when we're speaking into someone. Now, Abigail's just doing, she's doing her thing, but we never know how powerful our words can actually be. And actually, because of this and because of the way in which she's speaking to David, they actually label her as one of 7 female prophets in the Old Testament, even though she doesn't have the title of prophet. Because of the things that she's speaking over David before they have even happened, she is often looked at as one of the prophets in the Bible, or in the at least in the Old Testament. So let's keep reading. And if you guys have any questions, I think this one's pretty straightforward and it's not as triggering and things as last week's was. Here we are in verses 32 to 35. David said to Abigail, "Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. Blessed be your good sense." See, she had good sense. "And blessed be you who have kept me today from blood guilt and from avenging myself by my own hand." So Abigail, he's like, you are the only reason I'm not about to kill everybody. "For as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from hurting you, unless you had hurried and come to meet me, truly by morning, there would have not been left to Nabal so much as one male." Then David received from her hand what she had brought him. He said to her, "Go up to your house in peace. See, I have heeded your voice and I have granted your petition." And when she came to him, remember, most hospitality is like, you're going to come into my home and I'm going to give you some fish and some bread. But you saw she didn't just give fish and bread. She gave him cornbread and collard greens and mac and cheese. She brought all the things to him to make sure that he understood. And it was, again, this trying to overfix the situation on behalf of those who were around her. And so in that way, sometimes we have to, it's a fine line, because what you see here in Abigail is that she's open to expressing empathy and compassion for those who don't deserve it. And by who doesn't deserve it, I mean Nabal. In this way, she is still empathizing. She's trying to show compassion to the situation and trying to fix it. But again, in our own lives, we have to be very, very careful about those boundaries. That's probably the best word that I get, that we have good, clear boundaries with when and how we step in, because in that way, if we are not doing that, then what we end up doing is causing harm. My therapist says sometimes, she says, it isn't kind, right? We think sometimes, oh, I'm just being kind. That's my therapist says, it isn't kind if it harms you in the process. So we think sometimes kindness as an overextension that causes us to self-sacrifice or be martyrs. But if it isn't also kind to you in the process, then she says it isn't true kindness. And so we have to, kind of think about those things when we're choosing what and when to step into. For Abigail, this was worth that risk. And then let's just read this last little bit. So basically, he says, go home at peace. You're fine. Everything's fine. You can still tell, right? You can still tell that David is pretty mad, because to literally go up and say, I am just going to kill everybody. And you never see at any point that God is like, don't do that. And you literally see him kind of swear on God, like, you are lucky, because as if my name isn't David, and if it weren't for God, everybody would be dead. And you don't see any like God saying, no, David, don't do that. Verse 36. Abigail came to Nabal. He was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she told him nothing at all until the morning light. In the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. He became like a stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal, and he died. So in the same way I said, be careful about fools, another thing that I think to add to that is be careful about aligning yourself with false kings or queens. It says that she came home and he was having a feast like a king. But David was in fact supposed to be an actual king. And you can see this way, and Nabal is acting in these ways that he doesn't deserve to live into that title, right? He doesn't deserve, but he's doing all the things. Whereas you have David over here, things aren't always as they seem, y'all, right? And so he's literally disrespecting a soon-to-be king while at home acting like a king when he isn't deserving of that title. And again, Abigail right now is aligned with a false king, where, and it's just, it makes me laugh. And so he was like, he's drunk. I can't tell him anything, because if anyone's ever been inebriated, what can you tell someone when they've had too many things to drink? It's not going to work. But she did come home to talk to him, right? But again, he's happy. He's disrespected the future king, and he is married. Like, he is not even thinking about what he's done. He is not thinking about the consequences. He truly is a fool. He really is. There are people who live in the world doing things, never thinking about the consequences of it or the impact. And that is literally what Nabal is. Everybody's literally about to die. And this man would have went down partying, because he had no self-awareness, no introspection, no nothing. It was like, the lights were on, but nobody was home. And so she waited until he was sober. And she told him. And I imagine that he probably would have popped off on her, right? Because that just wasn't, he had already told her to do a thing. But it says that when she told him what she did, his heart died within him. So his heart literally turned to stone is what happened. His heart turned to stone. And then 10 days later, the Lord struck him and he died. So for 10 days, he went around with a heart of stone, and then he died. And so your words, right? Because it was on the other side of Abigail's words that this happened, that this change occurs. And so never discount your words and your courage to allow for the ability for you to be disconnected from dead things, right? And things that don't bring you life. Because Nabal, even alive, was a dead thing in Abigail's life. He was a weight. And on the other side of her courage, on the other side of her words, she is now disconnected from the dead thing. It didn't look like he was dead, right? But they say that his heart, when you read other versions of it, his heart became like he was, right? Stone, hard, inanimate. He was already there. He didn't have the appearance of that, right? But that was who he was and what he was doing. And yes, absolutely, Ronnie. We know many of stories. If you watched First 24, Snapped, any of those types of show. There are plenty of times where foolish behavior can literally be deadly. And so in this way, it did not cause the death of everybody, right? But it did still cause the death of Nabal. And then let's go down to verses 39. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the Lord who has judged the case of Nabal's insult to me and has kept back his servant from evil. The Lord has returned the evil doing of Nabal upon his own head." Then David sent and wooed Abigail to make her his wife. When David's servant came to Abigail at Carmel, they said to her, "David has sent us to you to take you to be his wife." Now, David already had 2 wives, but he had left them when he ran away. So one of those was Saul. So he had 2 wives. She was the 3rd wife. And he was married to all of them still. But she rose and bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "Your servant is a slave to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Now, if you weren't here last week, somebody offline could tell you what we talked about feet, meaning, but we're not doing that today. But she rose and said, "Your servant is a slave to wash the feet of the servants of my Lord." Abigail got up hurriedly and rode away on a donkey. Her 5 maids attended her. She went after the messengers of David and became his wife. So she actually does stay David's wife. She actually is there when David is crowned king. And she actually does give birth to a son by David. Oh, say, what is the meaning of the name Nabal? Foolish. He's a fool. That's what she's saying. Nabal means foolish. So that's why she says in verse, when she goes to David and she says he's living into his name. Yes, in verse 25, "Do not take seriously this ill-natured fellow Nabal, for as his name is, so he is." Nabal is his name and folly is with him. Nabal means fool. Just like Abigail, Abigail actually means to bring joy. And again, she literally does live into that name. She brings joy. She's the cause of joy. She's the reason why folks are able to live and are kind of able to live on. So yes, so that is what Nabal means. If you have any other questions, please make sure to drop them in the chat. But what you can see is, I remember last week someone asked about, we were talking about control, and there was a woman on the chat who asked, how do you basically, when you're in a controlling situation, and she was talking particularly about a marriage, like how do you still navigate that? And we talked about taking back power. We talked about some of the different things and what that looks like. But here you see Abigail, again, a wife who is clearly in a toxic kind of situation. Everybody is clear and everyone can see Nabal's behavior. I mean, even the servants. The servants are literally like, "Abigail, can you go and talk to him?" And if you're just tuning in, we were reading verses 1 Samuel chapter 25. That we read this in its entirety. But even the servant in verse 17 says, "Consider what you should do." He's begging her, like, your husband, and we're about to all die because of everyone in this house. He is so ill-natured that no one can speak to him. So everybody knew this is clearly like a toxic individual who everyone is kind of dealing with, right? And we talked about those things. And this is an interesting conversation, because we were also talking about women preaching last week, and there was a scripture about submitting and so on and so forth, and the notion of what it means to submit and surrender. Because we hear those things thrown out around a lot. I know growing up in my years of church, you hear it thrown around, and you hear it especially in situations of like marriages or partnerships, where there's this notion of you have to submit or surrender. And I remember hearing a group of men talk, right? And these were just a group of husbands. So I'm just, like a group of people, and they were saying, yes, but the person has to be worth submitting and surrendering to, right? And so the notion of yielding, submission, surrender, those things in any situation is not something that you just grant because somebody has a particular title. Again, there is something in that where in our ability, in order to even to surrender, if we think about surrendering to God, right? There is a level of trust that you must have in your relationship with God to be able to say, you know what, God, I surrender. Because true surrender is being devoid of expectation of a particular outcome. That's what it means when you surrender, that you're not stepping into it with a particular outcome. And so when we talk about surrendering even to God, sometimes we say we are surrendering, and I've preached about this before, but it's not true surrender because we only want to surrender as far as God is going to align God's self with whatever we actually want in our lives. Right. But true surrender is I choosing to align, to yield to God, regardless of what the outcome is going to be. And so here, again, submitting, surrendering, all fine things that have their places, but make sure that the people, the places, whatever it is that you're surrendering to are worth your surrendering. Right. And that can be hard because we think that people, there are a lot of people who walk in this world who think that just because they have a particular, well, and we've heard it, I'm your mom or I'm your dad, so you should just do this, or I'm your boss, or I'm this. And you can obey someone and not be surrendered to them, right? There's a lot of ways to kind of get around the thing. But again, that true kind of surrendering. So you see it here. Abigail's in two very different situations. Her husband, she doesn't submit in that way, right? He gave a directive and she made a different choice. But everything in her posture towards David says something differently, even from her bowing down, from her yielding. All of those things are completely coming from a place of surrender. It's coming from a place of yielding. It's because she respects who he is, because she respects like what, who he is going to be. She understands the calling on her life, on his life, that she is able to deal with him in a different type of way. And because of that, she's able to save everyone, but then she also gets, a whole bonus of becoming like a queen, or one of many queens. I don't know if there's multiple wives. I don't think they're all queens. I don't know what they're called. They're not concubines. I'd have to look it up. I really don't know when he's like multiple wives, and he went on and have other wives. But in that very same way, when I said earlier, be careful about who you you connect yourself to, we also sometimes have to be grateful for who we're connected to, because in that gratefulness, in that ability, sometimes when we're connected towards particular people, it means that there are certain things that are happen in our lives. Sometimes there are blessings that occur. Sometimes we're saved from particular things. Nabal's whole home is saved because of his connection to Abigail, right? And so we can be, we have to be careful about who we connect ourselves to, but also be grateful for the people in our lives who are showing up for us in a particular type of way, and making sure that we show some gratefulness towards that. Let's see. AQ, you said sacrifice and surrender. How should those things kind of work together? So, so sacrificing is more of when you think of it's like a giving up. It's it's more of a giving up of something. So you can sacrifice some. So I think of it as levels. I feel like you can sacrifice things and still not be surrendered. It's the same way, like I watch my kids, like, sometimes you tell them to do something, they gonna do it, but they don't really like want to. There's this is like, all right, so there's a way in which you can, again, you can take directives from a boss, but not really respect them, not really be surrender, so there's all these different ways. There's these situations where you can give up things, right? You can renounce things, but I feel personally that surrender is like the final It is the final form of act of sacrifice. It is the final form of giving up. It's the final form of submission, because when you get to the place of surrender, I mean, if any of you've ever surrendered, we say that song, I surrender all. We sing those things. But when you're at that place, you're at such a place where you are no longer connected to outcome. Even sacrifices in the Bible, right? They are sacrificing in hopes of something. I'm going to sacrifice unto God so that he'll bless me. I'm going to sacrifice this thing. So there's a so on the other side of the sacrifice. You're giving up in hopes of something being imparted, even if it's a good thing, even if it's a spiritual thing. I'm going to sacrifice fasting so I can get clarity. I'm going to sacrifice this so I can, do this. Surrendering is that I am doing this and I don't know what's on the other side of it. But I'm okay with that because I'm in such a trusting place that I trust that who is on the other side of that relationship. And so when you trust who's on the other side, when you're in your God relationship, when you trust God in that way, all right, God, I'm surrendering to, and that doesn't mean that you become, you scapegoat God. It doesn't mean you have no responsibility. It doesn't mean that you're in a posture of just kind of waiting for things to happen. But it means that in your doing, that you are not so tied to a particular outcome that it makes you blind to the other ways in which God can show up. Let's see. So his heart turned to stone because he was mad that she saved everyone. Well, it doesn't even say that. If we're looking, it says, let's see what it says exactly, and then let's unpack that a little bit. A Cherry. It just says that in the morning when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things, and his heart died within him. He became like a stone. So it could be, right, that it's because he was mad. But I'd like to think of it. One other option for you to consider is, if you've ever been in a particular type of any type of situation or relationships where the power dynamic or the things are in a certain way where one person has voice but the other person doesn't, right? And the relationship resides on the fact that one person always has the power, one person is always speaking up, one person is kind of controlling it, but the other person feels like they have no agency. So it's not really a relationship of reciprocity, because it's not a going back and forth where both feel like they have voice. So in that way, you can imagine that as soon as Abigail found her voice, she did something that was courageous. She decided to speak against what Nabal was doing. That killed off something. Well, in him, it turned him to stone, but it shifted the dynamics of that relationship. And in that way, it was like him being dead, because that relationship could no longer function. Some relationships only function insofar as you have no voice, insofar as you're not willing to speak up, insofar as you're able to stand in a particular position. Whatever the things are, some relationships are kind of built on that toxicity. And as soon as you seek to do something different, the relationship can no longer function as it was. And so that's another way to look at it. It could just be, yeah, he was mad, and so it turned to stone. It also says that God struck him dead 10 days later. So it might have just been the natural result. It might, there are a lot of different ways to that we can look at it. It's fascinating that she was of faith. He was not. She kept it in spite of him. Yeah. And so the interesting thing is, we oftentimes too see these individuals who are in the Bible who are not of the faith, in meaning that they're not Israelites, right? They're not the chosen people, right? But they still can see, they can see what's happening. They can see the blessing I've been watching what is this? I started watching the show on Netflix, The Last Kingdom. And there's this guy, I don't know, because they're all like Uhtred and whatever the names are. But one of the the pagan warriors, essentially, they're in a war. It sounds very much like what happened with Constantine. If you read about how, Christianity got spread over all over the world, and we could talk, Constantine, where they were in a war, and they're like, my gods against your gods, and you see that a lot. It's like God against God, like God gangs, like my God I'm gonna throw water on it and let's see who's God still starts a fire. Like it's really like gangish in the Old Testament, again, God on God, right? The true God against these other gods. But in seeing that the other side, who were Christians, were winning the war, he then converts and gets baptized, right? So and that is just to say that's the same thing that happened in Constantine. And Constantine then said Christianity is going to be the religion for everybody. And that's really how Christianity spread back hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But again, that notion that you don't have to be of a thing as we think about it to see it. There are plenty of women, there are plenty of people in the Bible who were not even believers, who they were like, well, Jesus oftentimes turned aside and was like, for your faith, for your faith, I'm going to heal you. For your faith, I'm going to do this. For your belief. But those are not people who necessarily believed in the way that we thought it to be. Nabal just didn't care, right? And you can be a believer. You can have a relationship with God and still have the same posture as Nabal. He had money. He's wealthy. He had this beautiful and clever wife. So like he's like, I'm good. Like I don't need to, and sometimes we see, I will not name the names of people, but some folks who are very much even in celebrity these days, who are watching, who, because they have money, because they have a certain level of celebrity, they think they are above the fray, that they can say whatever they want, that they can be damaging, that they can disrespect, that they do not have, they live outside of the consequences of whatever those things are. And other people see that and think that, you just get away with that. But at least in this case, there was redemption for Abigail and those folks. Gwendolyn, you said you definitely can relate to that, and I'm glad. Does anybody have anything else? Questions, comments, thoughts about Abigail? Again, she's probably a bit easier after after last week in JL's, and I thought about coming with some other folk, but there is this book, if you're interested, by this woman named Phyllis Tribble. I had to read it when I was in seminary, and it's called Texts of Terror. And so there were all these texts that were terrible texts that she considered in the Old Testament. And they kind of pick those apart. And so one of the ones we read last week, some people call like a text of terror, but there are some, and I just did not want to be, triggering multiple weeks in a row because they deal with some very kind of difficult topics. But if you're interested, that is one of those books that kind of delves into some of these other stories of things. But I did not, in our making sure that we're highlighting overlooked women in the Bible, I want to make sure that I'm not just highlighting their trauma and the negative things that happen to them, but we're able to give a lens of hope, a lens of where we can learn, where we can even transmute our trauma into like testimony or into other things. And so just wanted to be super mindful, but there's a lot of just depressing stories in the Old Testament, quite frankly. You wonder if there's a lost gospel of the Samaritan woman after she met Jesus. I don't know, but you know who knows, AQ? Google. It'll tell you in like a New York, a New York minute, whether there's a lost gospel. I don't think so. We know there's like the Gospel of Mary. There are some, some, but there may be, where there may not be a gospel, there may be some non-canonical references to her. But again, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Does anybody have any other questions or comments? You can put those in while I kind of do these last little announcements and these last little things. First, again, we will be in the coming weeks, you will be getting information about two different spiritual formation classes that you can sign up for. Okay, so the difference between like spiritual formation and TNT is spiritual formation is more you have to sign up for it. It's like small group, kind of it'll be on Zoom, but you'll be able to, you can see folks' faces and talk and engage, right? So there are going to be two different classes. We're going to be doing one on Wednesdays in April and one on Thursdays in April, outside of the week that we're having like our holy like our revival. So the one on Wednesdays will be Let Your Life Speak. And so this is actually based on a book that's called Let Your Life Speak. And so it's kind of on that notion of like, no matter what you are doing in life, what type of work you do or what you aspire to do, there's the voice that speaks to your life and helps to kind of guide you in what you're doing and kind of what you know. And so it's going to be taking, I'm looking at the definition because I mean the description. In this 3-week study, participants will take a journey led by their own inner teacher, their own voice, giving way to the deep connections of your lived experiences, how they connect to the world around us, and the opportunities to create the life we are created to live. So that will be Let Your Life Speak. And then again on Thursdays, we'll be going through Paul through the lens of 1 Corinthians, because there are lots of different things that Paul says in different places, but we're just going to study 1 Corinthians because that is our namesake. And then Sunday, we are back in the building. If you have not seen the announcements, a couple of things for you to be mindful of. We do, go align with like the state and city mandates. So you no longer have to be vaccinated to come to service. So whether you are vaccinated or not, you're welcome to come into the building. Also, there will be no pre-registration. So like them old days on Sundays when you just came and you got in where you could sit, you're not going to be able to reserve your seat here or there. When you get here, whatever seat is available will be your seat. Also, but masks will be required. So masks will be required whether you are vaccinated or unvaccinated. And because we will be letting more people into the building than we were previously, just make sure that you're using your own discretion about your comfortability with being in the building and being in the space. The rules have changed around social distancing and all of those things. So I don't want anyone to come under the illusion that you're going to come there and you may be 6 feet apart. So just be mindful of that. No vaccination required, no masks required. I'm sorry. Nope, that's wrong. Whoop, take it back. No vaccination required, no registration required, but you got to wear a mask. If you don't, we're going to have to escort you out in the name of the Lord. Okay. You're just going to have to listen from outside the doors if you don't want to wear a mask. But please, we look forward to seeing you this upcoming Sunday and every Sunday moving forward. Pastor Mike will be returning in a few weeks from a sabbatical. We have our Holy Revival coming up, and that will also be in person. So lots of things happening. Well, okay, great, Christina. Bring them on to church on Sunday and bring them up so we can meet them. But remember, you don't have to come on Sunday. You need to stay in your seat. You're not going to be able, if you got a backflip, you got a backflip in your seat, not in the aisles. Don't come and fall out at the front stairs. You got to stay in your locale. Okay. But we're going to all work out and figure this, all of this together. We're so excited to be worshiping back with you all. Again, please make sure you're following, all of our social media so you know all the things that we are doing. I hope this was fulfilling for you. If you have questions, again, feel free to reach out. We will continue to talk, and we look forward to seeing you on Sunday. Let's go to God in prayer. God, we thank you. We thank you that everyone under the sound of my voice be reminded that they have their own voice, that they have the ability to speak, that they have the ability to have agency, that in the same way, even if Nabal may have not listened to Abigail, that there was a willing ear in David, God, that there are people who are willing to hear what we have to say, who what we say matters, God. So I'm helping, God. I pray that you impart that on people, that they have voice, that they have value, that they are important, God. Let's take these lessons that we learned today, God, and let it continue to massage our hearts and in our spirits, God, so that you can relay to us exactly what it means for us. Some things don't hit us in a moment, but we get it later. So let us continue to gnaw on this like it is good meat, like it is good food, so that it can nourish us spiritually, emotionally, mentally, God, as we go through our week. We thank you for this time. We thank you for this community in FCBC, and we thank you for technology, quite frankly, God, that allows us to be connected and talk and deal and still be in different places, but still continue to be connected to you. We love you, and it's in your name we pray. Amen. 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 Okay, let's see. No one allowed up front. Yes, Sharon, we know, because Sharon's one of the security guards. She's not going to let nobody up front. Let's see. Inez, you said, I have a photocopy of a book, Helpmates, Harlots, and Heroes, Women's Stories in the Hebrew Bible by Alice Ogden Bellis. That was used years ago for a Bible study. Yep. So Helpmates, Harlots, and Heroes. That's just one. Again, the Texts of Terror. Some people have referenced like bad women in the Bible. So there's lots of books out there around women. Again, some of the theology, it just depends. You have to read through it. But the point is, those are supposed to be helpers in the same way that we're coming alongside to help you. We're not the end all and be all in what we say. We are just helping you as you journey through and helping you to kind of be able to look and see how you can identify things on your own. There may be things that you saw that I didn't even see based on your experience and your journey. And that's what this is supposed to be about. So don't let it stop here. Make sure that you continue to do your own work so that God can, that just adds to your evolving and your relationship with God. Happy birthday, Miss Sharon. Love y'all. Talk to y'all soon. Have a blessed day. See you soon.